All right, good afternoon. Apologies for that. The first half of the presentation wasn't recording, so we'll go ahead and start anew. Again, my name is Adonia Simpson. I direct the Family Defense Program at Americans for Immigrant Justice. I want to thank FLIC very much for setting up this training so we can go over the intake form. So today's presentation is going to be about the legal screening form that's completed, so individuals needing advice from an immigration attorney will be able to receive a consultation. So before we jump into the form, I want to outline some of the basics and processes of completing the intake form. First of all, if you are not an immigration attorney, please make very clear to the individuals that you're speaking to that you cannot provide any sort of legal advice. To provide legal advice when you are not an attorney is the unauthorized practice of law and very serious. So please make sure that they understand that you are not an attorney, but an attorney will be following up to provide them legal advice and counsel. Also, as attorneys, it's very difficult for us to provide advice if we don't have all of the information. So please encourage folks to be as open and honest with their information as possible. We need to know all the details. These questions on the screening form are there for a purpose, and they are very important as far as assessing if there's any sort of relief or problems with their case. Next, individuals because it's difficult, oftentimes folks want to get a consultation for another family member or friend. However, that person never really knows all the information. So we're really unable to provide information or consultation for somebody on behalf of another person. So it's very important that the person that needs the advice and counsel contact our office or complete the screening form through FLIC so that they can receive advice and counsel. The only exception to this is really when there's a child under the age of 14 that may not be able to provide the information and a parent is better suited. Next, please write legibly. Our office enters these intakes into our data system so that we can follow up and make sure that the appropriate actions are taken and forms are sent. So it's really important that you write clearly so that we can make sure that we're recording all of the accurate information for follow-up purposes. Next, ask every question exactly how it was written to obtain as much information as possible. There's limited space, so we do include a notes section, so include as much information and details that you think are necessary. The more information that we have, the better, so please provide more information rather than less. After you complete the screening form, it's going to be sent to either Americans for Immigrant Justice or Catholic Legal Services for review. And one of the attorneys in our offices will be following up with the client either by phone to conduct a consultation or have them come into the office for a follow-up meeting. Next, please manage expectations. We receive a large volume of intakes. We do intakes at legal screening clinics on the weekends in our offices and then also through the assistance of FLIC. So please manage expectations. Due to the high volume, it might take us a little while to get back to them. So please let them know that there may be a lapse of 4 weeks before we're able to follow up by phone and set up an appointment if necessary. If they need immediate assistance, if there's an emergency, they should contact and either come into the office for a consultation or contact a private immigration attorney. Finally, if the client is detained, they should contact an organization that does services at one of the detention facilities so that an individual can be met with directly. Americans for Immigrant Justice, we do provide services at Broward Transitional Center, Chrome, and Glades. So if an individual needs a screening in a detention center, the hotline for AI Justice's detention hotline is 786-454-8554. So let's get started. Let's jump into the immigration screening form. So the first page is the biographic information form. So you'll want to include the date that you're speaking to the individual, and the location. For the location on a FLIC intake, you can just write FLIC. The client's first name, middle name, and last name. Include complete names. If they have 2 last names, please include them both. Oftentimes, individuals may have a maiden name or have used other names. Perhaps when they were detained at the border, there was another name used. Include any other aliases or names that they've used any time in their history here in the United States. Date of birth and age are pretty self-explanatory, as well as sex and marital status. In regards to marital status, if somebody has a partner, make sure that they're actually legally married. That is a very important distinction. A lot of times people refer to somebody as their spouse, but there hasn't been a legal formalized marriage. That does make a difference, so ask if they are actually legally married if they indicate that they are. Social Security number is not necessarily needed. A lot of people feel uncomfortable providing that, and that's completely fine. We use it in order to do a conflicts check. We want to make sure that providing representation to this individual would not pose a conflict with any other clients. So sometimes the easiest way to do that is through Social Security number. If they don't have one or don't feel comfortable providing one, it's not necessary. You can just write NA. Next, the A number. Anybody that's had any sort of interaction with immigration, whether it's with court, applications filed, they will likely have an A number. It's usually 9 digits. If it's an older number, it could be 8 digits, and they put a 0 in front of it to make it 9 digits. So please indicate that number if they have them. It's extremely important as far as doing Freedom of Information Act requests or doing any sort of follow-up. It oftentimes appears on any immigration forms that have been filed, or on their work authorization or lawful permanent resident card. If they filed any other applications, you can also put the USCIS application number there as well, if applicable. Country of birth, that's the country that they were born. Many individuals actually do have dual citizenship, which is really important. For example, right now we're seeing a lot of Venezuelans that are seeking asylum. However, they actually maybe have citizenship in another country, for example, Spain. That could really impact any sort of relief that they may be eligible for. So make sure that even if they were born in one country, that they don't have citizenship in another country. And if they do, indicate it. Any languages spoken, if there's English proficiency, please indicate the level of English proficiency. And if the client has any disabilities or needs that may be needed to be addressed in the office. And for example, if they're hearing impaired or any issues such as that. All right, this is still page 1. This is the contact information. This is extremely important. We wanna be able to follow up with individuals. So oftentimes people may not reliably receive their mail, or perhaps they're survivors of domestic violence and do not feel comfortable receiving mail at their address. So please ask if this is a safe place that they can receive mail. And you can circle there behind addresses, safe, unsafe. If they're detained, hopefully we won't be seeing any of the detained intakes, and they'll be contacting the detention hotline. But indicate what sort of address this is. If it's an unsafe address or they don't reliably receive mail, indicate an address where we can reach out to them and send them correspondence if needed. Phone numbers, extremely important. If we get an intake and we're not able to reach the person, you've done all this work and we can't follow up. So try to get a couple phone numbers, not just a cell phone number, but perhaps an emergency contact number. That way we have a couple of numbers that we can reach out to. Oftentimes in this community, people's numbers change quickly, or they go out of service. So try to get a couple phone numbers. Also, email address. Many clients actually do have email, and that is a great way for us as attorneys to follow up with people and correspond. So please make sure that you're asking for an email address. And then give the attorneys a little bit of a summary why the individual was calling today. What do they want? Are they looking for any specific type of legal assistance? You don't need to write a lot, just give us an idea. Are they looking for naturalization? Are they looking for a green card, temporary protected status? So on page 2, that we ask for financial eligibility. For purposes of a legal screening and follow-up, financial eligibility isn't important, but if it's a case that we can provide representation on, there are certain income limits. So we want to know about their income. So this is for the immediate household, the immediate family household unit. So parents and children. This doesn't include aunts, uncles, grandparents. So indicate how many people are in the household, in the immediate household family. And then on average, what the income is. This does not need to be exact. We're not checking it. If somebody says I make about $200 a week, 200 times 4, there you go. And one other thing on that, if the client for some reason does not want to provide that, that's completely fine. You can just write in refused. They just need to know that we won't be able to provide any sort of representation. So page 3, this is the primary eligibility. So this is where we're really getting into the information that's going to be able to help determine if there's something that we can be able to do for them. So current status, are you currently here on a visa, or is it an expired visa? Do they have a green card? Do they have temporary protected status, TPS? Are they a U.S. citizen? On occasion, we get citizens that call because they want to petition for a family member. Ultimately, we're going to want to speak to the foreign national who's needing the immigration services, but please indicate what status. Some people may have come here without any sort of documentation. We call that EWI, entered without inspection. If they entered without any valid visa, just write EWI for EWI. If they are in a current status, perhaps they're here on a visitor visa, indicate when that status expires. So number 2, please list all entry dates, departure dates, locations to and from the United States, and the manner of entry. Some folks may have traveled a lot. Do this to the best of their knowledge. You can put estimated dates if people don't know exact dates. So for example, somebody said they came in 2000, try to narrow it down. Did you come in the beginning of 2000, in the end? Was it in the summertime? Was it winter? And about where did you come in and how did you come in? So continuing on page 3, other relief. Family relationships are extremely important. There's a lot of family members that can petition for individuals. So we need to know if these statuses, if these relationships exist and what sort of status the individual has. So the question, do you have a spouse, parent, or sibling who is a U.S. citizen or green card holder? Please indicate the relationship. So if it's a spouse, you can write spouse. Or where their location is. Are they here in Miami? Are they abroad? And the status. You could put, if they're a lawful permanent resident, you can put LPR. If they're a U.S. citizen, USC. If they don't have, in this situation, it wouldn't be applicable if there's no status. Also, we're looking for children who are U.S. citizens or any children in the family. That was an earlier question. So please indicate any children, their ages, and their status. So questions 5 through 7 are getting towards a type of immigration relief that's actually derivative citizenship. A lot of individuals are actually citizens of the United States, even though they weren't born here, but by matter of law, they've acquired citizenship or derived citizenship. So make sure that you're asking 5 through 7. Question 8, have you ever filed an application with immigration, or has anyone ever filed a petition for you, your parents, or for your spouse? There may be applications that are currently in process. There's some type of relief that's called 245I, which grandfathers people in to be able to get their green card even if they entered unlawfully. It's a very important question. Some folks may have filed for asylum a long time ago, and we need to know the disposition of that application, what happened. It really could change the posture of their case. So get as much information as you can. Sometimes people aren't going to remember, but if they know that something was filed, please indicate it, and then we can follow up and do what's called a Freedom of Information Act request to get a copy of their file. Next question. Number 9, are you or any of your family members currently serving, seeking to enlist, or previously served in the U.S. Armed Forces? It's an important question because there's actually a type of relief called military parole in place that allows certain individuals to get a lawful entry and parole into the United States without leaving if they have family members that are serving in the armed forces or have served in the armed forces. This doesn't apply to a lot of people, but it has applied on occasion. So here we go. Continuing on page 3. Question 10, are you afraid to return to your home country? This is getting at something called asylum. So a lot of folks that have been persecuted or have fear of return to their country may be able to seek protection from the U.S. government. There's a lot of requirements. It's a very technical definition, not just being fearful of going home, but there's requirements such as having to have filed within 1 year of entry. So we need a lot of details here. When did they come? What actually happened in the home country? Were there any threats? Why were they being targeted? It's an extremely important question, and the attorneys, if they indicated a fear, the attorneys will follow up to suss out some of that information. Questions 11 through 13 are for a type of immigration relief called NACARA. It doesn't apply to a lot of people, but it does on occasion, so make sure you're asking those questions. Question 14, have you or your family ever belonged or provided support to any organizations, including gangs, political parties, government, rebel groups, police? This question serves two purposes. One, it may be a basis of a particular social group for asylum purposes, or it could also be a bar to a lot of types of relief, including asylum. So if they have been a member of any sort of group, indicate what it was. Question 15 is only for individuals who are under 18 years of age. Some people are able to apply for a relief called special immigrant juvenile status, but it's for minors. So if the individual that you're speaking to is not under 18, it's not applicable. So continuing with page 4, this is really getting at other types of humanitarian immigration relief. So question 16, have you, your spouse, or child ever been a victim of a crime? And we're really particularly interested in whether they've been a victim of a crime here in the United States. There's a type of relief called a U visa, which allows individuals to petition for a non-immigrant visa that can eventually lead to a green card. However, it requires being a victim of a qualifying crime, which is usually a more serious crime, and it requires cooperation with law enforcement. So they had to have reported it. There had to have been some sort of case. It doesn't require an arrest. It doesn't require a trial, but there does need to be cooperation. So if there is an arrest and there has been a court case, the individual would need to continue to be cooperative with the prosecution. So if somebody's been a victim of a crime, and not just the individual that you're talking to, but perhaps their spouse or a child, there are ways that derivatives, spouses and children, can give benefits to each other. So please ask if they've ever been a victim of a crime here in the United States. If the crime was one of domestic violence, please also get the name and information about the perpetrator. This is really important for purposes of conflict checks. We want to make sure that we're not providing representation to somebody that may cause a conflict with another client. Question 17, have you been otherwise victimized? This is kind of a tricky question. There's a type of immigration relief called the T visa, which is for survivors of human trafficking. It's really important, really important that you understand that the most common form of trafficking is actually labor trafficking, not sex trafficking. So this could be a situation where they've been treated really poorly at their job, where they've been forced to work, there's been coercion, they're not receiving pay. Oftentimes I ask this question as far as how their work is going. You know, has anyone ever treated you poorly at work? What's happened? So get as many details as you can if this is applicable. Question 18, have you or your children ever suffered any mental, physical, or emotional abuse by a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident? There's a provision of law called the Violence Against Women Act, and despite the name, it is applicable to men as well as women, and it allows individuals to self-petition. So that means apply for themselves if there's an abusive situation with a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, parent, spouse, or child. So please ask about this and indicate any details if applicable. Question 19, does your U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, spouse, parent, child have any emotional or physical disabilities? I often tell clients when it comes to immigration doesn't really care very much about the condition of the immigrant. They're more concerned about the condition of any U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident family members. So for purposes of waivers or cancellation of removal, this information is really important and it may give people an avenue of relief. So continuing with page 4, contact with immigration. We want to know, question 20, have you ever consulted with an attorney, a legal representative, or a notario? If somebody is currently represented, we can provide a second opinion, but we cannot provide representation until that relationship is terminated. If they've received representation in the past on a matter, please indicate that. Also, another extremely prevalent issue that we've been seeing recently is notarial fraud. So individuals who aren't authorized to practice law oftentimes fill out applications for individuals. Unfortunately, we've been seeing a lot of fraud. So a lot of individuals are filling out applications where the information is not correct. The consequences of this can be up to a permanent bar, if not deportation. So this is a really serious question, and we are trying to shut down the individuals who are conducting the unauthorized practice of law. So please get as many details as you can. If they have had an attorney in the past, this is really important because we may want to reach out and get copies of their file. Question 22, has the government ever deported you or your parents, or other deportation proceedings against you now? If somebody's been stopped at the border, they may say, no, I've never been in deportation proceedings. But oftentimes if people were stopped at the border by Customs and Border Protection, there's a very good chance that they were served with a notice to appear and were supposed to go to court. So even if they say, no, I'm not in deportation proceedings, there's a lot of individuals who actually have orders of removal in absentia. That means that they didn't go to court, so the judge ordered their removal. So ask about that. If you had contact, so question 23, if they had contact with Border Patrol, there's a good chance that they might have an order of removal for question 22. And this goes back to the to the first page. An A number is so critically important because there's an 800 number that we can call to see if they are in proceedings now, in immigration proceedings now, or if they have an order from an immigration judge. So these are extremely important questions. The consequences of filing applications sometimes when people have orders of deportation can be very serious. Best case scenario, they lose their money. Worst case scenario, immigration may go ahead and execute that old order of deportation, and there may not be very much that we can do. So pages 4 through 5 are really dealing with criminal history. This is an area where we really need folks to be as open and honest as possible. Everything matters, and immigration knows everything. If we file an application, they're going to run fingerprints. And even if something happened under a different name, or it happened 20 years ago, or if it was dismissed, immigration's going to know. And we want to make sure that we're not doing any harm on applications, submitting applications where folks aren't eligible. So these are extremely important questions. Have you ever been arrested? Sometimes a good way to ask this, have you ever been put in handcuffs? Have you ever been detained by a law enforcement individual? Have you ever had to go to jail? Have you ever had to go to court? Extremely important questions because if there's been any interaction, we need to know this. Next, so we have a list here where you can actually list the date and location, charges, and disposition. Oftentimes we have people say, oh, it doesn't matter, it was dismissed, it's no big deal. It is a big deal, and we do need to know. And there's sometimes when people think that there's not consequences of a disposition, like withholding of adjudication. For immigration purposes, that is actually a conviction and could potentially have consequences. So we need to know everything. So for screener name, make sure to put your name and signature, just so if we have any follow-up questions, we know who to follow up with. And then as I mentioned, there's a notes section. So please use the notes section liberally. If there's anything that wasn't able to fit in on the screening form or something that came up that maybe wasn't directly related to the questions that you asked that you feel is important for an attorney to know, please indicate it there. So again, really important, manage expectations. After you complete the screening form, let them know it may take 3 to 4 weeks for an attorney to follow up. And even if we do follow up, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to take the case. We do have limited resources, so we try to provide as much representation as we can, and we try to engage pro bono attorneys, but we aren't able to offer representation to everyone. If that's the case, we will provide referrals to both other nonprofits and private attorneys, but we're going to do our best to represent as many folks as we can. So that's the end of the presentation. I don't know if I'm able to open it up for questions.
I would like to ask a question when you put it in the
Sure.
Freedom of Information request. How long does it take to get a reply?
So the question that we had was about Freedom of Information Act requests and how long it may take to get a response. It does depend on where we're doing the Freedom of Information Act request. So we oftentimes do FOIAs, or Freedom of Information Act requests, to a few different government agencies. We can FOIA the Executive Office of Immigration Review, so that's the immigration court, so that's going to get any sort of immigration court history. That's running about 4 to 6 weeks. We can also FOIA USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Service. That's a lot longer. You know, the more information that we have, the better, the easier it is to find people's information, but it's taking about 6 months. And then finally, sometimes we'll FOIA CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and that's much quicker. They usually get back to us in a few weeks.
Is there a form that's on the internet that is used for that?
There are forms. There are forms, and it depends on which agency you're FOIAing. EOIR has its own form that has to be signed by the client. USCIS, so ICE generally, so USCIS and CBP use the same form, although you're sending them to different places, but it's a G639. All right, other questions? Okay.
Okay, after we do the intake, they always ask, what do I need to bring to the intake when I do the interview? What should we suggest to bring?
To bring to an interview.
Yeah,
So I think when we follow up at our office, we'll be reviewing the intake and we'll see if there's certain things that we want them to bring. Like if we see that there's been application, we may say, oh, bring all your immigration paperwork. A lot of times people don't have all of that information, so it's very likely that we're going to do a Freedom of Information Act request.
Like the criminal, criminal
Yeah, we definitely, they should always bring, if they have the criminal information, we definitely want to see that. Otherwise, part of the intake will be, when they come into the office, will be, please go out and get this information so we can review it. Given the climate right now with immigration, we want to be extremely cautious. We want to make sure that we're not going to submit any application that could put somebody in danger of getting detained or deported. So the more information that they have, whether it's immigration documents or criminal documents, if they have them, they should bring them to the appointment.
There's an affidavit in our form. I don't think that was part of the presentation. Remember the form first time I was here? It was an affidavit that the person we were interviewing, taking the information from, had to sign. Of course, they can't.
Oh, yeah.
That was the financial eligibility.
That's the financial.
That's the financial eligibility, and you can just write in, so get the information, and as I mentioned, if they don't want to provide the financial information, that's fine, you can say refuse. That's not going to preclude us from providing the advice and counsel, but if they do have a case, we can't provide representation unless they're within income guidelines. So you can just write intake by phone in the signature area.
Okay.
The signature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what volunteers are able to do is only to do until say 6, right?
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. 6.
Yes, and yeah, the other pages are for the attorney. Are there any questions on the call?
I don't have.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining and listening to the presentation. And again, I want to thank Flick for hosting. And we look forward to seeing the intakes. And we can't express enough how much we appreciate your support and assistance in getting this information to the community.